I've done a lot of talks where people are holding their hearts and going, oh my God, we're going to lose everything. We're going to lose everything. But here's the thing, as I said, coming back to my days on the street, you can make this stuff work for you in a major way. You can either take the inverse position or take a proactive position. So
The Guy in the Hat, author, monetary researcher, speaker, gold, silver, Bitcoin investor, brand partner at Liberty Bullion Australia, at Storm Rake official Tim Manger, known as The Guy in the Hat, is the founder of Beat the Reset, a hard-hitting platform calling out globalist agendas and fighting for financial freedom. As an author, independent monetary researcher, and speaker, Tim exposes the lies, censorship, and fear campaigns used to push the Great Reset. He champions real assets like gold, silver, and Bitcoin to help people escape the crumbling fiat system. When the elites try to reset the world, Tim arms you with the truth to beat it.
what I do is, of course, the first thing I would do with my clients and recommend to my clients is invest in assets that are going to survive the reset. Well, that puts you in gold straight away. Silver, of course, and of course, Bitcoin, which has done immeasurably well, probably the most successful of all trading assets. And then once you're in those positions, have a look at what other opportunities there are. Have a look at BlackRock's WA token set, the real world asset tokens. Go and invest in those. Start understanding blockchain. Start understanding NFTs and how they're going to function. Because if you try to hide from this, you're going to get wiped out in this. You have to get onto the front foot. Here's the thing. The reason he said that is because the World Economic Forum is 1,000 corporations basically work models out that are going to benefit themselves, funded by the central banks, and they lobby the United Nations. Now, of course, the United Nations, having received the modeling from the World Economic Forum for this Great Reset, has accepted it and said, yeah, this is a really cool idea. And they've created an agenda called Agenda 2030. And if you go to any of your friendly universities, you get to see it on the wall in all different colors. And it's their sustainable goals models for Agenda 2030. The only problem is when you have a close look at it, it involves a complete reset of the currency. Now, if you know that, if you know your currency is going to get reset, then everything that I'm going to tell you from this point to that day is going to tell you exactly that your currency will be reset.
Tim, thank you so much for your time, mate. It's a busy time, but I wanted to firstly start off. How did the journey start before it became Beat the Reset and Make Good Choices? Where did your interest come in terms of the financial markets and the world economy, so to speak?
I think great question. I think the best lessons you learn in life is the ones you experience. Loss is the greatest way to learn. They say that the most intelligent people are those that have lost the most. So I don't know. I've done a lot of losing in life. I guess the journey started for me because the conventional narrative doesn't work. That's it. It just doesn't add up. It doesn't stack up. It could never work. And if you keep doing it, it's going to lead you into abject poverty. I couldn't see it any other way. I started in the conventional stream along with many people. And after a short space of time, I realized this is really not going to work. If we keep following this trajectory, I'll be wiped out by the time I'm 40. So I stopped doing that. And it requires a huge mindset shift. It requires a lot of unlearning, actually, which is harder than learning. And it also requires retooling and understanding that there's an alternative. The major problem for many people is they don't know of any other way to do it. They just keep grinding away at what they're doing, and it doesn't even matter if they're never going to win it. They can see this doesn't work. They're working longer hours. They're fighting with their partner. They spend more time at work than they do with their family, and it just gets worse every year. And they keep doing it, and at some point, you've got to stop that. And I guess that's where I started with this narrative of if I will end up in abject poverty if I try to do the job thing with the currency thing, it's not going to work. So yeah, that's fundamentally the beginning of the journey for me.
And you mentioned the loss. In life, we learn probably our best lessons through hard times. What are you talking about in terms of the loss? Was it a financial loss? Was it a business investment? Without delving too much into your personal life, but what was that trigger point?
Well, I have a really interesting childhood. I was basically born and bred on the streets of St Kilda, and I literally mean born and bred on the streets of St Kilda. We didn't have anything, and I didn't have a father. I had a mother. And so I got used to life on the streets, and I was very successful on the streets. So for me, I looked at life a lot differently to most people. Most people had a home life and a family, but I had a very successful business by the time I was 8 years of age on this corner of Balaclava Road and St Kilda Road outside the Greyhound Hotel. Got to know the lovely ladies of St Kilda, of course, who used to treat me like their son. Of course, I didn't know what they did for a living in those days, but I do now. Well, I don't now. Scratch that. But but I mean, I know of what they do.
I know what you mean.
You know where I'm going. And so I had a very successful life in many, many different things that I taught myself, because you've got to. I mean, you know what it's like when you're out there and you've got to fend for yourself. It's where you become really autonomous. And I'm very grateful for that experience. You know, a lot of people, you know, in my new book that I've written, my entire first section of the book is about what I learnt on the streets. And I've had people that have read the editors that have been doing the editing, and they're like, well, didn't that ruin you? I said, actually, it was amazing. It actually has really prepared me for things like, pandemics, as if that would ever happen. But so for me, I always looked at things a little bit differently to the mainstream. And I think when you go underneath the rug, everybody seems to be on top of the rug, but when you slide under the rug, honestly, that's where all the magic is. They don't tell you that. But I had a great childhood, even though it's not the conventional childhood. And I guess it's led me down this belief path of, well, you can still succeed, even though it may not be conventional succeed. It might be very unconventional. So in this life that I live as a monetary researcher, which is really in the end born out of necessity more than anything, a need to help my fellow man. I mean, I guess one of the answers I want to give to the question you asked earlier is the reason I do this is because COVID taught me a lot about, not me, but more about my fellow man and my fellow man's inability to understand what his environment is. And I saw so many people confused and completely discombobulated by a narrative that was clearly ludicrous. And I'd seen this narrative before because, that's what we're told, to get an education and get a job and, then go buy a mansion in some wealthy suburb with a Lamborghini. I mean, it's just garbage, right? So, the pandemic for me was watching my fellow man walk over a cliff unnecessarily, but more not because they were stupid. It was just because they were unaware. There was this kind of idea that intelligent people are going to survive the pandemic. Well, it depends what your yardstick is for intelligent, Yeah. All manner of people. And, I saw this in my early life on the street. One thing I learned on the street is it's easy to survive if you know how. It's sort of, it's like if we took someone out of the city and put them into, the desert, our Indigenous people would be fine. They would survive quite comfortably, but someone in the city couldn't do it. But then again, you take an Indigenous person from the desert and put them in the city and you've got the same issue. And the question becomes, well, are they intelligent? Yes, they are intelligent. It's just that they have no knowledge of this. And once you do have a knowledge of it, you get under the rug. Everything changes. And that's what my life is now, is educating and helping my fellow man. I mean, the only reason I do this journey at all, the only reason I get out of bed is because I've got 4 beautiful children. And my daughter's getting married actually tomorrow, my first born. And anybody who's ever had, the incredible chance to have children, we're blessed. And COVID taught me as a dad that everything I learned on the streets was for a reason. I didn't realize that 40 years later, every tool and every skill and every single piece of know-how would be brought into life again in 2020. And I cruised through COVID, but the difference was I had 4 children along my side, on my starboard bow, that needed a lot of protection and a lot of, protecting from all sorts of complications out there. Yeah. So after COVID was over in 2022, I have a very good friend of mine in Melbourne, Layla Melky, who's also a social media girl. And she encouraged me. She said, Tim, please, you need to bring this knowledge and this research to the forefront. And at the time, I said to her, I don't think anybody really wants to know, Layla. I think too many people are damaged from the 2 years, because we just come out of 2 years of pandemic, and Melbourne was particularly bad. I'm actually grateful that I was at ground zero in Melbourne because I got to see and experience, the worst of it, and it was people. Really in the end, the entire exercise was about how to help people. So that's where this channel. I might be rambling a bit, but that's where this channel was born out of, is the need to help people. So that's my starting point.
Yeah. And it was a brilliant starting point because you talk about Melbourne was restricted. It was the most restricted place on this planet. And this is the journey you've gone through. I've gone through a similar journey, obviously, working mainstream media, sacked for not wanting to comply with mandate, having my eyes opened up to the monetary system stuff, the real story. When you started looking under the rug, so to speak, because we live in a world where capital gains tax, income tax, inheritance taxes, keep going, fuel excises, in South Australia, the River Murray tax, which hasn't been removed, but the flow is still pretty good. Where did you start, and how did the rabbit hole start, so to speak, on that monetary system?
Yeah, well, first of all, I was completely wiped out in COVID. I should mention that.
Yep.
So, I was on my way to being wiped out before COVID for a whole host of other reasons. Well, as I said, the narrative doesn't work for me. I had got halfway through my life. I was reaching the age of 50. And for some guys, that's like this horror milestone. If you're a cricketer, it's good. If you're having your 50th birthday, it's not good. So I kind of got to this age, and I thought, looked into the eyes of my 4 children. I thought, they're never going to have the dream if I don't do this differently. So long before COVID, I started researching better ways. Yeah, taxation. I mean, you talk about taxation and the tax department and governments, and look. Fortunately for me, my father, when I was younger, was my grandfather. He brought me up, and he escaped the Eastern Bloc during the time that the Wehrmacht moved its borders east and took his little town, and everybody he knew in it, he never saw again, including his wife. And he brought me up. He lost everybody he ever knew, and he brought me up. And one thing he told me, and he drilled into me from a very young age, is he said to me, if you don't see it with your own eyes, it never happened. These things, these people, whoever they are, these people in suits, they're not here for you. And he said, you've got to understand, if you're going to protect yourself, you need to question everything. So I guess when I got into monetary systems, this is really where it all started for me. I realized conventional methodology isn't going to work. It just followed a natural dead end with a brick wall at the end of it. So I had to change the game strategy around a little bit. And I went looking and I went researching. And my grandfather was a professor of languages at Melbourne University. He taught me how to research when I was young. That's something he gave me the gift of research, how to read between lines, how to look between the narrative, how to take, this kind of legalese speak, this nonsense that they talk, and how to interpret it so that it makes some kind of sense to you and your family. Because in the end, every human just wants one thing, and that's to be happy. That's all anybody wants. We want to be happy, and largely left alone to be happy. That's what most people, in my experience, want. The other thing we want is a family, and some family that we can love and that loves us as well. We're very basic, actually, in our needs. And I realized that if they were the two things that I wanted in this world, I was never going to get there. So this is where I started listening to nonsense like taxation and started researching taxation. I went right back to the start of taxation and usury, and central banks and governments. And I researched every president, all the constitutions. I just went crazy, with, millions of strands of research to try to find what was the benefit for mankind, and if it changed, why did it change, and where did it change, and who changed it? And I just went down this rabbit hole of questions that led me to really where we are now, and that we got down to the company I've got now, which we turned over 100 million last year, and it took me 3 years. It actually only took me 8 months to do it, because for the first 18 months of my channel, maybe nearly 2 years, I didn't even make $1. I was bankrupt, and I relied on people buying me cups of coffee online through this Buy Me a Coffee program, which gave me like $5 a time. And I wanted to give the channel away because it was too much work. But then in the end, I realized there were people that were interested, and there were people that started to ask the same questions that I was encouraging people to ask. What I came to educate people on is please ask yourself, why are you using worthless color pieces of paper that are taxed into oblivion by people you never elected? Why are you doing this? Because that's what I asked myself. And if you are doing this, what does the end look like for you? Is it looking prosperous? Is it looking like it's going to be a wonderful future for you? like, and then I traveled and I got to go to countries like the Middle East that don't have any taxation systems. And, when you go to the Middle East, you see these incredible, you see a lot of capitalism, you see a lot of industry, at the local level, because people are encouraged to work. People are encouraged to get out and be industrious. Whereas in Australia, if you're running a business, you are smacked over the wrists and told that you're bad through taxation. Essentially, it's a basically please don't be successful tax is what, you talk about capital gains tax. It's just please don't invest tax. You talk about income tax, please, don't try and rise above, whatever class 3 clerk level of the council. That's where you belong. That's what you're born into. Stay there, it's just ridiculous. And I can't do that because I can't allow my children to do that. I don't want that world for my children.
Yeah, and that's understandable because I think there's a lot of people now looking around for that because, as you say, through COVID, we printed money, gave everyone JobKeeper. We then inflate the system to I've heard all sorts of reports, 60% of money 60% of the money right now in circulation was printed in COVID and handed out. I go back in simple footy terms, and I know you're a Collingwood man and I'm a Port Adelaide man, and Port Adelaide, we wore the same colours as you guys in the SANFL, and it started off as a kid. I'd go to the footy and Mum would give me $2 for lunch, and you'd get a pie or a pasty or a Coke or a can of Tab or lemon twist. That was $2. You go to the MCG or Adelaide Oval or Optus Stadium in Perth or up in Queensland, it's probably cost you $20 now. And even when you look at house prices are rising. We bought a house for $1 million and sold it for $2 million. I've made money. Have you made money, or is just the currency been devalued? And that's the biggest awakening I've found over this last few years. And it's going to continue to go that way if we keep printing money out of oblivion, because I've heard you talk too about the history of the money. You talk about what Roosevelt did. Can you give us a bit of a rundown on that? Because when I first heard you speak about this on Instagram, on your channel, Beat the Reset, it blew my mind. I was like, whoa, what's going on? Because I didn't learn that in school, and I finished school. Wasn't great, but I finished school.
Yeah. Well, it's a great question, and it really goes to the heart of where we are right now. In fact, it's so relevant now. It's never been more relevant, that question. So really, I'll start with where we are right now historically. We are in the current environment in 2025. We are at around about June 1932. I've been following the timeline to a T. And in June 1932, the United States had the unenviable situation where the common man was starting to lose confidence in the currency. Now, you've got to understand in 1932 in the United States, and I use the United States as a great example because they are currently the world reserve currency. They are the superpower of the planet, and they have been essentially since 1944 under the Bretton Woods system. So I think the United States is a great example, and Australia has often been called the 51st state of the United States. We are quite subservient to the US, and because along this journey, people have said to me, well, what relevance is any of this? I think what it does is it helps to paint a picture of how far the elite systems and the central bankers and the governments are prepared to go to so that they stay in power and that you don't, essentially. So let me step you through this. 1932, what happened was, I'll take you back just a couple of moments to where the problem really began in the West. In 1913, there was a US president called Woodrow Wilson, and he signed into life the Federal Reserve Act in the dark of night. Now, when you look at most crimes being solved, you can tell by the timing of the events. And of course, it was December 23rd, dark of night. Congress wasn't even sitting, but they rushed through this Federal Reserve bill. Well, that's never going to work out very well. And Woodrow Wilson was a Democrat president. He signed it into life. And of course, about a year later, we find ourselves in a 4-year trench war over on the Western Front. I don't know if these two things are correlated, but I'm just going to put that on the back burner for a moment. I've done enormous research into that. So it was interesting. So the United States went to war, and of course the Federal Reserve's job was to print the US currency. I mean, they became basically the buyer and lender of last resort, and they became legally the currency printing institution of the United States. And this, of course, till to this day, obviously. Now, the problem with the Federal Reserve is they're not federal, they have no reserves, and they're a privately owned central bank. And the families that sit behind the central bank are very powerful families. And the President of the United States is not allowed on the soil of the Federal Reserve without explicit permission. So largely it's its own country, if you like. So you can't go onto the grounds of the Federal Reserve. There are 12 central banks, or the 12 Federal Reserve banks in the United States. Now, to give you the macro, the Federal Reserve is one of 60 central banks around the world. We have our own here called the Reserve Bank of Australia, which is headed by Michelle Bullock, who is out. We have a governor. She took over from Philip Lowe, who did even less work than she does. She's on about $1.3 million a year on the taxpayer's purse, and her total contribution so far has been to raise interest rates, turn on the printing presses, and lower interest rates. That's all a central bank can actually do. They don't have anything else they do. So they raise the interest rates, they can lower the interest rates, and they can switch on the money printers or currency printers. So the Federal Reserve was really the major problem in the US. They turned on the printing press at a time that the US was on the gold standard. The United States, contrary to popular belief, only ever had one gold standard. That was from 1900 under the Gold Standard Act to when gold was confiscated on April the 5th, 1933. And I'll quickly go through the gold confiscation because this is how far a government is prepared to go. So once the Federal Reserve was signed into life, we started to get nefarious things happen all of a sudden. For example, we had the Spanish flu in 1919, social distancing face masks, and of course the beautiful vaccines. Then, of course, we had Wall Street just blew up in 1920. It just exploded. The entire building just blew up and people were killed, and no one knows who did it. So Wall Street just randomly blew up. I think it was September 20, 1920, 21, 22, somewhere there. So it just blew up. But then again, around about that time, the US had a pullback on the stock market in 1923. They were all Democrats, so they were all Republican presidents through 1920s, and right up to Herbert Hoover, who saw the crash of the New York Stock Exchange in 1929 in the October. Now, the question is, what led to the crash of the New York Stock Exchange? And see if you can draw any parallels to what we just saw with the absolute decimation of our derivatives markets. We had something called the Roaring Twenties in the 1920s, and people taught in the schools that this was a great time. This was the most awful time because what happened was the commercial banks would borrow currency from the central bank, who was happy to lend it to them, and they would lend it to mums and dads at a higher interest rate, and that's how they ran their businesses. And of course, through the 1920s, there was this incredible spike in commercial banks loaning funds because it was just a novel idea. You don't need to have your own currency. You can just borrow from the commercial banks. So borrow, borrow, borrow. Problem is, on the other side of borrow, you got to pay it back. And of course, that's where the problem started. That triggered loss of confidence on Wall Street. By October of 1929, the commercial banks were literally shuddering under the huge losses that they'd suffered from the inability of the common man to actually pay back any of the debt. So Wall Street started to lose confidence. It took 3 years for Wall Street from the October of 1929 to essentially virtually the end of 1932 to completely collapse. You're talking the wipeout of the biggest derivatives market in the United States. Of course, they collapsed to 10% of their original value. So the Wall Street had completely lost confidence. That's all you could say. The problem was the thing that caused it was the US dollar and the loaning, of course, the loans from the commercial banks. So what happened next was as a result of the loss of confidence in the US dollar, the US Treasury. So in 1932, we saw the loss of confidence in the US dollar. The US Treasury, of course, at that time was under Herbert Hoover. The United States went to a presidential election on March the 4th The following year, in 1933, Roosevelt was a Democrat. Now, another Democrat was in office. We hadn't seen a Democrat in the presidential office since Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve into life. So now we've got another one, and it's Franklin D. Roosevelt. He was actually, interestingly, he was hobbled by by polio and perhaps even the vaccine. We don't know for sure, but he had a walking stick, which of course he had empathy from the common man. And what happened here was Roosevelt arrived in office on March the 4th. The first thing he did is he went into a state of emergency. Virtually the entire presidential early part of Roosevelt, in fact, his entire presidential reign was virtually in a state of emergency. Now, the question is, what is a state of emergency? A state of emergency is a moment where it's a different legislature is brought into, constitutionally ushered in. The legislature enables a Congress to pass law without actually deliberating. It's just literally making rules as you go. And we saw that through COVID. We saw states of emergency. One of the worst things that can happen is state of emergency and martial law and these sorts of things. So US was on a state of emergency from the moment Roosevelt came to office. He was in office 2 days. And he was, of course, faced with a loss of confidence in the US dollar. He was faced with the crash of the New York Stock Exchange and Wall Street. And, of course, the only thing he could do that he had left in his power was to basically, under a proclamation, his first act as president was to issue a proclamation 2039, which shut down the commercial banks overnight. So I just want people to really think about this. You know, imagine you went to bed tonight and you woke up and every single commercial bank had been closed. Every one of them. There was, so all you were left with was the dollars in your pocket or under your mattress or anything that you had on your person. That was it. The commercial banks were shut because people were running to get their cash out of the commercial banks. And of course, that is not a position that the United States wanted to be in at that time. So that was step one. So this was step one of a very, very, very nefarious plan for the common man. Step one was to shut the banks. Step two happened a month later on April 5th, 1933, and it's become one of the most iconic moments in monetary history, and really the first time ever that we saw the final blow for the common man, really, for me, was after all of these things were set up in 1933, 9 months after the gold was confiscated, Roosevelt and the Treasury wrote and introduced a new act called the Gold Reserve Act. And the Gold Reserve Act was designed to protect all the gold that had been confiscated from the common man. So it was to ensure that the common man could never really hold gold. That's essentially all it really was. That's what the Gold Reserve Act was. We have it, you don't, too bad. So, of course, by the time the gold reserve came around, that was January 1934. That was 9 months after gold confiscation. It's no wonder people starved in the streets. And you can't even find this information. The suicides were off the charts. I remember when I first started researching this, you could find a little bit about it, but now it's getting incredibly difficult. Because people had nothing. I mean, people lost everything through here. So January of 1934, Roosevelt introduces something called the Gold Reserve Act. And in that act, he basically did two things that were unthinkable, absolutely unforgivable. The first thing he did is change the price of gold. Now, the price of gold never changed in the US. I mean, since George Washington in the 1790s, right up until Roosevelt in 1934, gold had virtually never moved its price. In fact, the gold price was fixed for 100 years. It hadn't changed since the Coinage Act of 1834, 100 years earlier. So gold, the common man was used to trading a fixed price for gold. But Roosevelt decided that in this confiscation, it was time to change all of that. So he altered the price of gold and he changed it from $20.67 an ounce to $35 an ounce. Now, what that does is, of course, at the ground level, which is the part we're most interested here, is, of course, it wipes people out by 59%. So whatever dollars you were holding in US dollars were now worth 59% less the next day than they were. And this was just a catastrophe. But it was the thing that he did next, though. And this tells you everything about governments and treasuries and central banks. But this one, for me, the gold confiscations was not the worst thing they did. I mean, it was tragic, yes, but the final blow in the Gold Reserve Act, when they wrote the Gold Reserve Act, they agreed that the President of the United States could call had the power to change the price of gold, which of course he took that advantage and changed the price of gold. And then they of course made it illegal to trade gold. So it was totally illegal to trade gold. They made it, that was it. You cannot trade gold. There is no more gold trading in the US. We're done, we're dusted, we're over, we're finished. And that was it. And that stayed like that for 40 years. The common man was not allowed to trade gold. I mean, the central bankers could, but there was no gold trade. Now, that was 1934. In 1936, Fort Knox was built, of course, which is, of course, we've just heard that pop up again.
And we've heard Trump and Elon Musk talk about right now whether
well, check the stores. And I'm about to go to the National Gold Conference on the Gold Coast, and my entire talk's called "Is There Any Gold at Fort Knox?"
Yeah.
But really, in the end, what happened was it's interesting to me that there's a military facility being offered up. Considering this was the gold of the common man, there was a fair amount of gold that was owned by the common man. But it's interesting that once that gold was confiscated, we don't know where it sat from 1933 to 1936. We don't actually have that information. It's just going to be rumor and conjecture. But by 1936, the military, which is Fort Knox, offered up a section of their grounds within the military grounds to the Treasury and said, well, look, we'll give you this area here. And of course, the Treasury said about contracting a whole lot of builders who were not privy to the entire design. They all had their own little kind of sectioned off designs. And so no one knew any other part. So you couldn't know how the plumbing was done, and he couldn't know how the walls were. It was very covert. And they built this building, which is called Fort Knox, which sits at Fort Knox. It's also known as the Gold Depository. And the problem with it is that we are told, and we're given these really crazy photos of these trucks rolling up and trains, going along. Nobody sees any gold in any of these photos, but you just see these trucks backing up to this building. And apparently they were loading gold into the vaults. I mean, you're talking 280 million ounces here, guys. I mean, so they put it all on the train, apparently, and they went down the train. This story could be picked apart, and it's not worth it. So I just put the letters BS in front of it and just have done with it. But so the question is, was any gold put into the vault? That's a great question. But one thing I found fascinating in my research is that Fort Knox actually has its own military guard, and they're called the Minted Police. And the Minted Police are standing guard. Now, this is bizarre for me because, first of all, you're inside the grounds of a very highly protected military base, a military base that has never, ever been attacked, ever. So first of all, you've got a building inside those grounds with another military police that mans the building itself. And their whole job apparently is to stand guard. So if anybody gets past the military guards at the front, these boys are going to sort them out. And they're there, of course, to stop people getting into the gold vaults. Well, has anybody ever carried a 12 kilo? I mean, the gold reserve bars are 12 kilos, 12 and a half kilo gold bars. How many of those are you going to? If you got away with one of them, you'd be lucky because they're really heavy.
You'd want a strong backpack, wouldn't you?
You need a strong backpack, and it always reminded me when my boys used to play GTA online. They used to have the choice of knocking off the cash in the vaults or knocking off the gold. And they said, Dad, every time we knock off the gold, we get the people. They're too heavy. We've got to drag the bags. And I said, well, yeah, you got to work hard for wealth, boys. So of course, this is the stupid thing. Now, this guard, I realized very quickly that stands outside Fort Knox is not there to stop people getting in to the vault. They're there to stop you ever knowing what's in it because there probably isn't anything in it. I mean, we don't know for sure. I mean, I couldn't possibly tell you, but it seems to me to be rather interesting that the Lateran Treaty, which set up the Vatican was set up in 1920. I mean, the Vatican was signed into life in 1929. A lot of people think that the Vatican is this like thousands of years old. The treaty was signed into life in 1929 at the exact same time at the New York Stock Exchange, months apart. The Lateran Treaty was in the June, and the stock market crashed in the October. And there's been a lot of rumor and conjecture over is the gold from the US actually stored in that facility over in the Vatican. We don't know for sure, but it's certainly looking at the timing. You'd have to ask yourself the question. It seemed to line up perfectly. And Fort Knox, again, the question on Fort Knox, and these are the entire gold reserves of the United States. In fact, they don't say they're in the entire gold reserves of the United States. That's not what it says. It says they are half the gold reserves of the United States. So where's the other half? We have no idea where the other half is. Some people say it's under Wall Street. Some people say it's somewhere in Washington. We have absolutely no idea because there is no accountability for the wealth of the nation. Now, the central banks are in a really interesting situation. The Federal Reserve has to, of course, being a currency printer, is required by the Bank for International Settlements, which is the most powerful of all the central banks. They are required to have reserve assets. When you're printing currency, you're required to have ballast. In other words, if you're printing X amount of dollars, you're meant to have X amount of ballast in your reserve vaults. Well, there are only really three currently to this day, and as of 2019, there are three Tier 1 reserve assets, Tier 1 being the sort of reserve assets that central banks would hold. US dollars is a Tier 1 reserve asset. US Treasuries is a Tier 1 reserve asset. And those two are total garbage, so I don't know why you would have those as reserve assets. And, of course, the final one is physical gold. And the question has been, well, does the Federal Reserve actually have any gold? And that is a great question because we're not privy to that. So the people of the US have a fundamental problem before they even get out of bed in the morning is where is the wealth of the nation exactly? Because you're using US dollars and the wealth can only, if the US dollar, so you've got to understand what the gold standard back in 1933 was important for one reason. From 1900 to April the 5th, 1933, when the gold confiscation took place, you could take a US dollar. I've actually got them here. I've got 1935, a few old US dollars. Shame I didn't bring them to show you, but you could take a US dollar into your commercial bank and they would convert it to gold or silver. It would have it written on the actual note that this is a gold certificate, this is a silver certificate. And you could take them in and convert them over. If you didn't want to use US dollars, then you could just get the equivalent amount in gold. Well, that all stopped on April the 5th, 1933. And we haven't seen that ever since in the West. That has never been a thing. The US, by the way, in 1934, after gold was banned and the trading of gold was banned, in the August, they also banned silver bullion only. Coinage was allowed, but silver bullion was banned, not confiscated, but just banned from trading. So all commodities trading stopped. The US went to war, of course, in 1939. Or actually, they didn't go to war in 1939. The war broke out in 1939. The US signed a neutrality clause in 1936 saying that we would never go to war unless provoked. Well, it turns out in 1941, bada bing, they were provoked by a sleepy nation. And of course, you had, December 7, 1941 took place. 1944, the US goes on to something called the gold standard and they announce it to the world. But the only problem with the 1944 gold standard is the common man couldn't trade it. So what was the point of it? There's no point having a gold standard if you have no convertibility. In other words, if you can't take your currency into a commercial bank and convert it to gold, then you're not on a gold standard. You're being told you're on a gold standard, but you're not on a gold standard. There's no benefit to you if that's the case. And from 1944 to 1971, the United States, that's the gold standard that everybody talks about called the Bretton Woods standard. But the United States, again, you couldn't trade gold. So the question becomes, was it really a gold standard? So I guess, I go into enormous detail on these things, but I just want to wrap that little part up by saying that this is the length that your government will go to ensure that your wealth is kept absolutely governed at all times. That's what taxation is for. You don't need taxation if you have a central bank because you have a money printer. Why would you come to mums and dads for cash that you can only get limited amounts from mums and dads and businesses when you've got a money printer sitting on your starboard bow? You can just turn it on and pump out currency. I mean, that's that. So I'll just stop there to see if you've got any questions on any of this stuff.
No, that makes perfect sense. And obviously, the bit that's a lot of the stuff that is probably not known. We talk about to the common man and woman because we're just out there grinding, 2 jobs, mortgage, kids in school. Can we afford this? Can we buy a new car? Can we go on a holiday to Bali? There's all that stuff. But the interesting piece you got to is the 70s then, and you talk about the so-called gold standard. We soon go off that and head to a petrodollar, don't we?
Well, the petrodollar is another fictitious creation that was all set up by Kissinger. And in 1974, the year before that, there was an oil embargo, and the US were absolutely smashed in the oil embargo because they decided to back the wrong. Well, I wouldn't say that's not the correct way to say it, but they backed Israel in the Fourth Israeli-Arab War. The Saudis, of course, who are very powerful in that region with oil and control the oil roads, were put an oil embargo on the US. So they were desperate to do some deal with the Saudis. They were desperate to say sorry in some kind of way. Kissinger went cap in hand in 1974 and basically said, look, the US dollar is not backed by anything. Of course, that ended in 1971 under Nixon on August 15. And he said, we want the US dollar in reserve because from 1944 to 1971, the world traded on the US dollar. It was required. That was what the agreement was. That's what Bretton Woods was. All countries traded unilaterally on this US dollar standard. But after they went off the Bretton Woods standard, that meant that all nations could depeg from the US dollar. Well, the US started to lose a little bit of control economically. So, of course, they went to the Saudis and said, well, hang on a minute. Perhaps we could do some sort of deal where, you sell oil just in US dollars and we'll give you military aid if anybody, we'll look after the Middle East with our military because that's really what the US dollar is backed by is the military. That's all it is backed by. But it's never really signed into life. There was never any contractual agreement with the petrodollar. It was just a handshake agreement. And it's really interesting now. And I want to jump forward to where we are now with that because the Saudis, the United States are the biggest producer of oil on the planet, and the Saudis under Aramco would be the second biggest. So the three biggest in the world would be probably United States, Saudi Arabia, Russia. These would be your top three. And of course, in order, Saudi Arabia, of course, sells a lot of oil through the Middle East, and the United States want US dollars used because, of course, if you're using US dollars, you can have them in a lot of the central banks through that region. As I said, there's 60% of central banks still have US dollars in reserve as a tier one reserve asset. So the US dollar is still quite strong in that area of oil trade. But Russia has just recently broken all of that because the United States put sanctions on Russia just recently for a number of reasons. Obviously, Ukraine, which is a sideshow. The bigger one is, of course, BRICS, which is the group that is de-dollarizing, in other words, moving away from US dollars. And one thing you don't do when you're dealing with the US is move away from US dollars. Otherwise, you cop sanctions. And that's exactly what happened to Russia. But Russia's smarter than all of that, of course. And the other thing is, for anybody out there that's listening to this that thinks somehow Russia is an enemy of the United States, I mean, if people really understood, and this is where I go back to, when I do my talks, I often say to people, if you want to know how the power works of this planet, then you've got to go and look at who are the friends and who are the enemies. And I'm telling you, Russia sit on the board of the UN together with 5 other nations. There's the United States, UK, France, Russia, and China. All have full veto power on the board of the UN and have virtually had so since 1945. They are all mates. They have drinks together. They sit at the Olympics together. Their teams play together. And then when it comes to economics, apparently they're all at war. And of course, that's for your convenience. But of course, Russia is not an enemy of the United States. Russia is a very successful nation. So too is China. These are very powerful economies. And if you're going to sanction a country like Russia, then you better understand that they're commodity-based. I mean, it's very difficult to sanction countries that are massive gas producers, massive oil producers. I mean, they can survive quite well without you. It's a little bit like saying to somebody, you'll be sorry when I'm not here, and you find out they're not actually sorry. They're having a party. So Russia is, of course, now transitioned to digital, starting the move to digital. They traded about $200 billion recently for oil trades with China. So what the United States are doing is pushing Russia, of course, to basically become more technological in their transactions. And look, if we can't use US dollars, we'll find something else. So because the reason we have a petrodollar, people probably wonder what it actually is. It's just because of our history with the US dollar, it's just easy to trade oil in US dollars. It's just easier to do that. It's like when you go to the shop. Could you take a silver coin? Yes, you could take a silver coin and transact that silver coin, but it'd be a pain. Could you use Bitcoin? You could. But again, there are complications. You're just going to use the currency because it's easy. So most of the countries through that region would have US dollars in reserve, so it's easy to trade US dollars. You wouldn't do yuan because no one in the world uses yuan. The US dollar, as I said, is held 60% in reserve. The euro is held about 20% in reserve. The yen and the British pound about 5 to 6%, and the yuan maybe 2%, 1%. So no one's going to trade oil in yuan. But I mean, you asked a question about what does all this mean for the people in the street? And I really think this is where I want to get to, because a lot of people listening to this at the higher level think, okay, well, that's all great to know stuff. But in the end, I guess the big question is, and I'll put it to you, I think you probably want it, maybe, is this something your audience would want to know?
Yeah,
Is,
that's the key bit, absolutely where it leaves us now, because you touched on before, you went through the history of it. We were talking about Spanish flu, then we obviously links similar to COVID. Then you were talking about control, similar links with COVID. Then we're seeing releasing of monetary, I suppose, freedoms in terms of people and printing of money. We now face a situation where we're seeing Donald Trump putting on tariffs, taking off tariffs, shaking up. But what does all this mean for the individual who life has never been more expensive, cost of living's probably never been higher, taxation's through the roof, hyperinflation, we're not at hyperinflation, but inflation numbers we're calculating on a basket of goods that constantly change. The pressures have never been greater. So how does the average bear deal with it?
Change what you're doing immediately. So currencies are fundamentally the issue because they have no value. Remember what I said from 1900 to 1933, if you could not take a dollar back to the commercial bank and convert it to a commodity like gold or silver, then it has no value. You're dealing with worthless paper. And the paper value is determined by how much, by a couple of things. The confidence of the market really drives the paper value. I don't know why we would do it. The 19th century, we didn't have this problem. We had bimetallism in the 19th century. That was gold trading against silver. But the question here is you need to stop doing currencies. In my opinion, as a monetary researcher, I only research monetary assets. And right now, there are only three I even talk about. One is physical gold, which is constitutionally, historically, and intrinsically your monetary system, whether you like it or not. J.P. Morgan said in 1912, the only true money is gold, everything else is credit, and he was the most powerful of all central bankers. So you need to stop doing currencies because currencies are governed centrally and their value is governed by confidence and the confidence of you and the people around you. So as soon as the confidence is lost in these trades, they're done. There's no value in them. Gold is not a confidence trade. Silver's not a confidence trade. Bitcoin is not a confidence trade. And I'll come back to Bitcoin because that's the newest version of monetary value we have. So the fundamental problem here, and I'm going to say it very simply because a lot of people, and I wrote an entire book, I've written 2 books on this. I haven't got them in front of me, but one was called Things We Were Never Told About Money, and the other one was called The Great Asset Shift. And in Things We Were Never Told About Money, I explain one simple principle. The question that I wanted to know the most was what is money and what isn't money? How can somebody walk up to me and say, what is money? Is this money? And I looked for the best definition of money anywhere in the world I could find, and it came down to a simple definition. Money is a store of value over time. That was it. That was the entire definition. I went through encyclopedias and dictionaries and everywhere I could go. Money is simply defined as anything that can store value over time. So if your dollar can buy you what it could buy you in 1966, then it's a store of value over time. But if it can't, then it's not money. And the question is, if you were born in 1966 when the currency changed from the imperial to the decimal, could your dollar buy you what you have? I mean, what a stupid question. So the US dollar to this day has less than 1 cent. We're talking about the world reserve currency, has less than 1 cent of its original purchase price in 1913, because in 1913, when the Federal Reserve turned on its printing presses, well, they actually turned them on in 1914, but around that time, and it was backed by gold at $20.67 per ounce for gold. So that meant that your currency had a fixed value point. The gold price didn't move, so therefore your currency didn't move because it was at a fixed value. Now we don't have that. We gave up these gold-backed systems in 1933. We've never had that. People say it was in 1971, but in reality, it was 1933. So people are running around with pieces of paper that are printed by a cartel known as a central bank who have a license to print cash. They can turn on the printing presses and they can pump it out. And they did that during COVID using something called QE, quantitative easing. Now, here's your problem. There is a metric that you can calculate that tells you for every dollar you add to the pool, it will bring the entire value, the entire pool comes down in value. So if you keep pumping this stuff like confetti into the system, which is what these banks do to fix issues and, of course, to lend funds through government Centrelink programs and, government help programs. They pump and pump and pump currency into these systems. Now, they do that knowing the risks. They already understand what that's going to do. They understand, number one, it fixes the first problem. They give the people cash. People want cash. People want to eat. People want to buy. The problem is every time they pump a dollar in, it completely devalues the entire pool, which causes something called inflation. Now, they try to control inflation using their interest rates. Of course, you saw them go up from zero. In COVID, they were at zero, and then all of a sudden the Reserve Bank hiked them up to 4.35% cash rate. And now we're watching them come down. Now, this is the end game. So now they've destroyed the value of the currency. And this is why, it's not Donald Trump's tariffs. I mean, I know that is like it's really good for headlines. But what it is, it's the central banks. Once again, the central banks are the buyer and lender of last resort. They want to be the buyer and lender of last resort. They have a currency printer. And when they turn that thing on, you need to make sure that you have other asset wealth, because the problem for the common man is we've been shown lots of wads of cash and movies, and you're shown pallet loads of $100 notes, and the common man has this kind of Tats Lotto ticket mentality. Oh, if I get more of it, it's going to be so good. It's like, guys, this is garbage. This stuff is just confetti garbage. And when your government, there are a few problems you've got. When your government starts handing this stuff out free, the problem with that is that means you need it. If you need it, it means you need your government. Because the moment and if a government can give it to you, the other thing they can do is stop giving it to you. And a government would love you to be in that position because they have total control over your destination. Once they start handing you, things, we saw that in 33, once you got handouts under temporary medium exchange, you do not want to know what comes next. So the problem here is that the common man doesn't know any other way to do it. They get cash, they use cash, they have cash in the commercial bank. Cash, in a commercial bank will give you 5% interest. The only problem is the currency was debased by 12% last year in negative velocity. So people don't know this. All people know is that your big glossy brochure at your commercial bank tells you if you put your $100 in the commercial bank, I'll give you 5% at the end of the year. Fantastic. The only problem is at a debased rate of 12%, you're backwards -7. And you can watch this. People say to me, well, where's your evidence of this? Go to your supermarket. Go and have a look at the difference in the prices. I mean, I put an Easter egg up on my TikTok channel and had more views than some of my educational videos because it was $12 Easter egg. I got this giant box, and when I opened the box, there was all this air in there and this little Easter egg in the bottom. And it was $12. And it was like, I don't remember these things being $12. But the Easter egg hasn't gone up in value. It's the currency that's collapsing in value. And if you keep doing currencies, it's going to be, and of course, with currencies, with that kind of mentality of currency, comes something called debt. And for your audience, I'm going to tell you very quickly what debt is from my angle, because everything I'm about to say, and this is going to shock a few people, is debt. And think about what I'm about to say, because if you are doing any one of the following, you are in a debt position: stocks, shares, equities, bonds, annuities, treasuries, 401ks, which are in the US, pension funds in the UK, superannuation, cash within a commercial bank, and real estate. Now, people shock real estate. He's taking a swipe at our beloved real estate, and I'm not going to go there today because I haven't got. I'll speak for 8 hours on real estate and why you should never do real estate. A personal opinion, of course, but they are debt-based positions because their entire premise is founded and built on the promissory debt that comes out of the central bank. In other words, you are using a worthless position to try to create a position of worth. Well, you can't do that, especially if it's centralized. Real estate centralized. Currency in a commercial bank is centralized. Anything on the derivatives market, superannuation is centralized. Anything that is centralized gets wiped out on currency reprice markets. So we are going through something called the Great Reset. Now, these are not my words. These are the words of the World Economic Forum founder, Klaus Schwab, who's just stood down, of course, because Tony Blair is going to come in and take over. But here's the thing. The reason he said that is because the World Economic Forum is 1,000 corporations that basically work models out that are going to benefit themselves, funded by the central banks, and they lobby the United Nations. Now, of course, the United Nations having received the modeling from the World Economic Forum for this Great Reset, has accepted it and said, yep, this is a really cool idea. And they've created an agenda called Agenda 2030. And if you go to any of your friendly universities, you get to see it on the wall in all different colors. And it's their sustainable goals model for Agenda 2030. The only problem is when you have a close look at it, it involves a complete reset of the currency. Now, if you know that, if you know your currency is going to get reset, then everything that I'm going to tell you from this point to that day is going to tell you exactly that your currency will be reset. You're going to watch it devalued to zero. All fiat currencies. Fiat means by decree, your government's telling you to use it. That's what fiat currencies are. All fiat currencies, bar none, go to zero. And our recent examples are in Venezuela, Lebanon, Zimbabwe, and many, many others. Their currencies have completely collapsed. The Australian dollar lost 5% on the last derivatives market pullback. We just saw the Aussie dollar drop 5%. That's unheard of. And the reason for all of this is because we are transitioning across a reset from a physical currency to a digital currency, not electronic. We've already got electronic currencies. They sit in commercial banks, but we're moving across the bridge. Now, the bridge for me will be basically currencies to stable coins to central bank digital currencies, which is exactly what the central bankers want, is this central bank digital currency, which is largely programmable. It won't be at first. It'll be given to you as a good thing at first, of course. But the problem you're going to have, and this is the one everybody needs to think of, and this is the big one, is that the currency, to bring in a new currency, you have to devalue the old one, and the new one will be a completely different value. So what you've got to think about is if I'm holding $1 Australian and that gets devalued to zero, and the new currency that comes in is valued at $1 Australian, how many of the new currency am I going to be able to purchase with my zero value old dollars? How many zeros are you going to need to purchase a $1 new to central bank? And that's a great question. And the answer is you can't do it. You're a complete wipeout at that point. And at that point, the government has factored in the universal basic income, exactly the same as Franklin D. Roosevelt's temporary medium of exchange. So you're going to get a handout at some point because you can't eat and you can't fund your life using a debt-based system. So that's the negative. The good news is there's a positive to all of this. I mean, I know some people say, you just give us all the bad news, Mr. Go in the Hat. But the great news is you can stop doing debt at any point. You can get off that little wagon and you can shift your dollars into wealth assets. And there's an interesting thing that there's 4 things you can do with a dollar. And this is where most people are totally unaware. There are 4 things you can do with a dollar. Number 1, you can spend it and it's all gone once you've done that. See you later. Hasta la vista. Number 2, you can save it. You can pop it in your friendly commercial bank and get 5% interest on a negative 12% debased currency. Terrible idea, but that's it. So that's positions number 1 and 2 for the dollar. Spend it and save it. Positions number 3 and 4 are where you start to change your life. Number 3 is a trading position. In other words, you can trade your dollars on markets that produce upside. And then my favorite of all, position 4, is invest it. And in the investment area, that's where my channel is completely entrenched. And we are in physical gold, physical silver, and of course, digital decentralized assets. And there's only one in that category, which is Bitcoin. So if you do these things, what happens is you stop doing debt the moment you start doing wealth is the moment you leave the debt system. And what you do is you transition all of your positions from debt into wealth assets. And what that does is it changes from centralized control to decentralized capital upside. In other words, these assets are intrinsic. They don't need control. They don't need government oversight. Gold doesn't need, some overlord. Gold is simply and has always been and will always be the base of our monetary system. Constitutionally, if you have a look at your constitution, it says debt can only be extinguished using gold coin. It doesn't say anything about currency. And by the way, in the Banking Act of 1959, there is no definition for money. And so it's interesting that our own Banking Act in Australia doesn't even have a definition of money because we don't use money in our system. We use currency in our system. Currency is not money. And the moment people understand this point, that you need to stop doing debt positions and switch it. And so many people come to me and they go, but you can't buy stuff at Woolies with gold. Of course you can't. But you can have enormous wealth in gold and silver. In other words, you store your wealth. These assets go up in value. And it's about value. It's not about how many Aussie dollars you can get or how many pesos you can get. This is about value. What is your value? And if you don't hold wealth assets, it's quite a simple, it's a very simple model. It's if you don't have wealth, then the only thing left on the table is debt. And we've already established over, in the time I've been doing my channel and the books and the talks I do, we've established over and over again our debt, what is a debt position and what is a wealth position. So debt, once again, is anything that is perpetrated by a promissory debt note that comes out of a central bank, and also anything that is centralised, anything that has counterparty risk, anything that is on a supply-demand curve or a confidence trade. That's all debt-based. But there's this incredible life. I want to say this. There's this amazing life that awaits if you just stop doing that. And you shift over to position number 4, especially position number 4. As I said, spend, save, trade, invest. Invest. If you invest, it means you're going to have long-term wealth, dynastic wealth, wealth with enormous capital upside. If you watched what happened in the carnage on these markets recently, the number one asset that smashed all other assets was physical gold. Surprise. Our investors, a lot of our investors are in gold. Silver is the big one for me, by the way. I mean, it really is the most devalued asset. And if you're going to get out there and purchase assets, you really want to be buying devalued assets, which of course pushes real estate well off the table because it's debt-based and it's overvalued, depending on where it is. It's not in all cases, but in we're taking a general kind of median line here. So the reason people are finding it tough out there, and if anybody's listening to this thinking I can't do this anymore, it's because you're in a debt position. You are in a DEBT, debt-based position. That's all you've done. It's not that you're stupid. There's no need to work more hours. I don't want people working more hours. I want people with their families. I want people with their children. I want people with their loved ones. I want people happy. I want my neighbor to survive this. Because if my neighbor survives this, my children have a lot better chance of surviving as well. So I need to educate people. So if you're out there and you're thinking, I can't eat, or I haven't been out to a restaurant in a while, or I want to travel, or I want to wear a beautiful dress, or I want to buy a boat or a car, it's really simple. You've just got to stop doing debt for a while and to try wealth. I mean, it's a little bit like during COVID, and I'll stop and have a breather a second, but it's a little bit like in COVID. There were two ways you could have done COVID. You could have done what they told you to do, or you couldn't, or you could have done your own thing. And it's like, that's what we do in the wealth system. You can follow these guys if you want to, but there's a big brick wall there, guys, because that currency will go to zero. They'll bring in the new digital currency and you will not be able to get it. So you'll end up stuck on the crossover bridge of a universal basic income, which the government has already factored in. What you want is wealth. Wealth is what protects your family. Wealth gives you choices. Choices gives you freedom, and freedom gives you life. Anyway, over to you.
Well, probably the only last question I've got, it's been an amazing breakdown for people listening, is many years ago you said they banned gold. Can you see that happening again? Because as you say, the currency goes down, the new currency comes in, you can't afford to get it. The bridge is the only way, is the assets, the real assets to get you there. Can they do that again? Or will they do that again, do you think?
In short, no, I don't think the government's going to do that, for the simple reason it depends in Australia, we've never done it. So the Banking Act of 1959, Section 4 says we can do it, but it was watered down in 1976. So there's, in my opinion, no, not in Australia. And for one very good reason, no one owns gold bullion in Australia. I mean, if I grab 15 people off the street, we just did, you might have been watching our channel, we did a bunch of street talks around Australia, and we went to every state, and a lot of people have never even seen it or heard of it. So no, I mean, this is not 1933 where they were on a gold standard. We're not on a gold standard. We're on a nothing standard. So first of all, but I want to answer this in a slightly different way. They are coming after something this time. Oh yeah, they are definitely coming after something, because you got to understand, I've read the doctrines I've read the post-scarcity economic model by the World Economic Forum and the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the Agenda 2030.
What is it?
They're coming after ownership. That is exactly what they're coming after. And there's a very good reason for this. This is not woohoo. This is in their own documentation. It's just nobody wants to read it. I used to put it up on my channels back in the day, and I've probably still got access to them. You can see that the Bank for International Settlements and these guys, they're coming after ownership. And the reason they're coming after ownership is, one, because they can, and every Western constitution has a confiscation clause for a reason. There's three types of clauses you see in the West. You see compulsory acquisition, expropriation, and eminent domain. Now, they all are confiscation clauses, and what they are there for is for moments when a government needs to make wholesale changes to its direction. So what they're coming after is ownership. That's exactly what they're going to target here. And people who have been following my work on real estate and the loss of titles would know that that's exactly where this goes. This is a much bigger conversation, but that is exactly this. The gold confiscation will not happen because no one owns it. There are a whole other bunch of complications with the gold. One of the other big reasons they can't confiscate gold, especially in the US, is because the last time they confiscated gold, they only pay the book price. So remember that a government has to pay you for the asset. They can't just take it. They can give you a reason to take it, but they've got to pay you for it. The last time the US did that in 1933, they would only pay the book price. The problem is we don't trade on a book price for gold anymore. We stopped doing that a long time ago, around about the time we had a spot market. So the US gold price today on the spot market, just to give you some idea of why the government can't confiscate, the price of gold this morning is at about $3,150 US. The book price is $42.22. So the eminent domain clause says that the trade has to be fair and equitable. So if a government's going to buy something off you on a confiscation, it's got to be a fair and equitable agreement. Well, I don't think a $42 payment for a 3,150 ounce coin or gold bar is equitable. I don't see how that would even be plausible. But I don't think that's the point here. I think the point is it's ownership that's the problem. Ownership is really what they're coming after in terms of not so much confiscating people's properties, but confiscating their ability to own properties. It's a little different. And the reason for that is if you have a look at tokenized blockchains and you go and have a look at any of the stuff that BlackRock and Larry Fink have been talking about with tokenized blockchains, where we are moving in the next 5 to 6 years is to this full NFT system, this non-fungible token system, where all real estate will be fully liquid, fully traded. You can trade it. You can even have what they call it equivalent ownership in their new model. Equivalent ownership's not ownership. The ownership of the assets is going to fall to the entitled secured creditors of the central banks. That's who's going to own your assets. And of course, the Depository Trust Corporation and the trust funds and the trust pools. That's who. I mean, BlackRock. It's a $10.6 trillion asset pool. I mean, who did you think was going to own all this stuff? So what will happen, in my opinion, is we're going to watch the currency be basically. I think the real quick overview of what's about to happen here is we will see the money printers turn back on. You will see the interest rates drop, brings us to 1932. Confidence will be lost in the currency because nobody will be able to actually buy anything with it. That will drive, of course, confidence out of the markets. It'll bring down the derivatives markets. At the point the derivatives markets come down, it triggers something called the Uniform Commercial Code, Article 8. All property ownership will be lost to the entitled secured creditors at around about that point. And it will leave people reeling, thinking they own something which they actually don't own, and finding out that their entire life is now on a blockchain. And that is exactly where it's going. And I can't say it any simpler than that. And in amongst all of this, a lot of businesses get wiped out. Small businesses totally decimated. You're going to watch rates, taxation, climate change nonsense. All this stuff's going to be brought in to ensure that you lose it, whether your house gets washed away in a flood or blown away in a cyclone. It's going to go. It's all going to go. And the entitled secured creditors will take over the ownership. You can trade it under utility tokens or security tokens, but you can't own it. It will live on the blockchain. It'll have full NFT capability. This is all scripted, and this is exactly so. Somewhere between this conversation and Agenda 2030 and the end of 2030, and maybe even beyond, because this is in my new book. My new book's called 2033. This is where it goes. It's going to the full loss of ownership. The final nail in the coffin in my own state has already been put into place. If you had a look in August the 3rd, 2024, last year, all titles were, any title that's being transacted is going to go digital. They were basically, most of them are already moved. 60 to 70% of all titles are already digital. Nobody knows where they are. Nobody knows who own them. But one thing we do know is that all the original titles were destroyed. And no one gave anybody permission to do that. So they were just en masse destroyed. The end. You can't get your original titles. You can get something that looks like the original title. But in effect, this is in preparation for a whole lot of moving parts that all come in together, up the road and result in the loss of all ownership. And that's it. I mean, in 1994, the Uniform Commercial Code Article 8 was changed, removing 400 or 500 years of ownership. So it was all done and dusted 30 years ago in 1994. So that's what they're coming for. They're not coming for gold. There's no point the Australian government confiscating gold. They're going to get like 6 bars from some lady down the road. It's no, that's not it. That's not required here. And plus, gold will play a part in the new world. But Bitcoin is the big one for me. I mean, Bitcoin's just been signed into life as a strategic Bitcoin reserve, essentially putting into position to become reserve asset for which other currency? Probably XRP. XRP, of course, ISO 222 currency. I'd say what we're going to see is the commercial banks trading XRP and Bitcoin being the strategic reserve asset. And I think that's exactly how these guys want to play it. And they will use a stable coin, which is a currency coin, to cross over the bridge. And by the time we get to the other side, which will probably be 5, 6, 7 years from now, any knowledge of currencies will be a distant memory. Ownership will be a distant thing. And people shouldn't freak out. If you're listening to this, I mean, I've done a lot of talks where people are holding their hearts and going, oh my God, we're going to lose everything. We're going to lose everything. But here's the thing, as I said, coming back to my days on the street, you can make this stuff work for you in a major way. You can either take the inverse position or take a proactive position. So what I do is, of course, the first thing I would do with my clients and recommend to my clients is invest in assets that are going to survive the reset. Well, that puts you in gold straight away. Silver, of course, and of course, Bitcoin, which has done immeasurably well, probably the most successful of all trading assets. And then once you're in those positions, have a look at what other opportunities there are. Have a look at BlackRock's RWA token set, the real world asset tokens. Go and invest in those. Start understanding blockchain. Start understanding NFTs and how they're going to function. Because if you try to hide from this, you're going to get wiped out in this. You have to get onto the front foot. So, and I know that people just want to be left alone. I get it. So do I. I just would love to go and sit under an oak tree with the kids and read a book in the afternoon sun. But unfortunately, these guys, they treat us like pulling wings off flies. They're not going to leave you alone. And you have a duty. I feel like we have a duty to protect our families. So take advantage. The knowledge I present, the information I present on my channel is vast. It's not easy to listen to some of it. Some of it's on my Patreon channel. And I keep the really heavy stuff for Patreon. And it's not easy to listen to, but it's well researched. And I can tell you that's exactly where we go from here. Everything I have seen, everything we've watched, everything we're feeling at the moment is showing us exactly that model is being rolled out. So, yeah, there it is. Have a nice day, guys. Hopefully,
and make good choices.
And make a choice. I mean, why do I have to be the guy to tell people sad is not real?
Yeah. No, Tim, thank you for your time today. It's been amazing. A history lesson, and also your advice on where you think things can go. And for anyone who this has resonated with, can you beat the reset on Instagram? What other areas? How else can we contact you?
Oh, we're everywhere. We've got our own website, beatthereset.com.au. We do consults all day, every day. We help people transition from superannuation to self-managed super funds. That's our big one. We are asset providers for gold, silver, bullion, 999 investor grade, and of course, Bitcoin. And they can get me on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify. I have a channel on Spotify where I used to do those sort of like 15-minute easy listen to little podcasts we're driving along. I have 2 books, obviously. I've got a 3rd one on the way. That's taken a lot of work. It's taken a lot of twists and turns, but also we're busier now because we're global and we've been traveling. I virtually haven't even been in the country for much of this year at all. And I'm just about to take off again. So the world really is listening now. And I've got people from countries I've never heard of that reach out and they say to me, look, where are you from? I say, I'm from Victoria, Australia. Where is that? It's like, Antarctica. It's sort of near there, right? We have a kangaroo in the backyard and a wallaby. What are those? I've never seen one. So speaking to people all over the world who are coming to this tiny, we're relatively, we've probably, got a lot of growing to do with the business, but we're relatively small on global scale. But people are coming to us and just saying, tell us about this portfolio, tell us. And anybody who has done this, anyone who has done this, would never, ever dream of going back into the debt system. You can't. It's like trying to put the genie back in the bottle. It's a little bit like the moment that you stop doing, general practitioners and hospitals and you start understanding there's a sun and there's fresh water and there's vitamin C and there's take your shoes off, right? Once you do those things, you never, ever go back. And it's the same in our field. We celebrate. I have, and I'm probably, I don't want this to sound egotistical, but my office is packed full of gifts from people all over the world in Australia who send me stuff all the time. I can't even get in there anymore. And just to say thank you, because when you help people and you're genuine and you just want to help, so many people come to me and they say, this is the first time I've experienced a human just not try to rip me off in this system. I'm talking in the field that I'm in. And I said, well, in the wealth system, it's abundant. I mean, there's nothing to rip anybody off. There's so much wealth out there. You just got to discover it. I'm not the owner of it. So once you enter the wealth system, you'll never go back to debt, or you'll never look at that stuff. Anyway, you'll never look at it the same way. So,
thank you again, mate. Appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. And of course, as always, make good choices.
Thanks for tuning in. I hope you liked it. And hey, we'd love to hear from you too. So drop us a comment. And stay tuned for the next episode of The Ballsy Show.